We have roughly 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese.
One of the things that really interests me in how you approach this is the fact that you incorporate not just diet, which, it's easy to just look up on Instagram or YouTube or something and pick up some diets, but really how you can personalize the prescription, so to speak, to a patient and meeting them where they're at. Like, what does that process look like? How do you, interview these patients? What do you do with them?
I think it all starts with defining the challenges that all of us are confronted with in terms of the environment, right? I always start there by explaining to patients that we live in an obesogenic environment. So why would I bring up the idea of weight, right, or being overweight or obesity into a conversation about autoimmune diseases? It's largely because it's very, very rare that I work with anyone who doesn't have an issue with weight. And if you take a look at, it wasn't what I intended to do. When I first started my career, I thought, this is all going to be autoimmunity and how do we lower inflammation and get the immune response to behave itself. But inevitably, there's this weight component that shows up that always has to, or often has to be managed. If we take a look at the most recent data from the CDC, we have roughly 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese. Of that group, we have roughly 42% that are classified as obese, which is having a BMI of above 30. Roughly 9% of that group, 9% has a BMI of over 40. When we look at child populations, right, people between the ages of 2 and 19, 20% of the population is either overweight or obese. So this idea of weight and how to manage weight dovetails really nicely with just habit change in general. So I always start with defining what the challenges are. We live in an obesogenic environment. We live in an environment that's wildly stacked against us, not only in terms of food, but having high inflammation in the body based on those dietary choices. Typically, my process involves a lengthy intake, really getting to know patients and what the particular challenges are that they face, and then modifying lifestyle, in a very collaborative manner in order to get to a place that's sustainable for them. The reality is that 95% of people who start any kind of dietary strategy fail. They bail out of it in pretty short order. And we have 31 long-term studies that were conducted at UCLA that were really well designed that show us that not only is there a 95% failure rate, but 83% of that group goes on to gain more weight than they had to lose to begin with. So without the right kind of education and empowerment and understanding about how diet and lifestyle influence the potential for a disease state or a diagnosis, I just find that it's a really good place to start, is to define what are the challenges that we really face as a society.
Yeah, they go hand in hand for sure. And, a lot of the research, as you pointed out, is showing us a couple of things. One of them is that obesity is not just putting on weight or fat, but it's a pro-inflammatory state. And I think that there's a convergence in literature in that regard. The second point that you really touched on here is the importance of working with someone who can sustain the learnings that go into this process and maintain it for lifelong improvement in one's health. So those are great points, Lee, and thank you for sharing that. And I'm excited to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these topics.